This is Owl Talk,
a Sigma Pi podcast
featuring stories,
news, updates, and more
from the world of Sigma Pi fraternity.
Welcome back to the Owl Talk podcast. This week, as we prepare to celebrate Veterans Day across the country, we welcome a Sigma Pi veteran to the podcast. For this episode, we are joined by Nick Zeisler, an alumnus and founding father of our Eta Sigma chapter at Colorado State University, and also a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Air Command and Staff College, as well as the U.S. Air Force Institute of Technology. Nick has spent a great deal of his career working for the Air Force, but he's also got a lot of experience in corporate America and as a consultant. And of course, he's been a volunteer for Sigma Pi fraternity. We'll talk about all of that and more today. So, Nick, thank you for joining us for the Owl Talk podcast.
It's great to be here, Joe. And I will say apologies to everybody who was hoping for a real veteran like Brad Poronsky or something like that.
We had Brad on last year.
Yeah, I know. He was an undergrad when I was the chapter director at UT Austin. So it's been great to watch his meteoric rise.
He's the best. So there's so much I want to cover with you on today's episode. Maybe we can start at the beginning. I gave our listeners a brief overview of your history, but maybe you can give us a deeper look at where you're from, how you got to Colorado State University, and then ultimately what brought you to Sigma Pi fraternity.
You bet. Well, I am a Coloradan, grown up here, wasn't born here, but got here early enough, and started college at a small school out on the Western Slope. And for the precise reason of joining a fraternity, I moved back to the east, moved up to Fort Collins, and started at Colorado State University so that I could be in a fraternity. And there was a group of guys in a colony. And I had the opportunity to be part of the founding event at Eta Sigma, which was not at all what I had expected. I figured I'd join. I rushed the big houses there, and there were these guys that were building something and putting something together. That definitely spoke to me, and so I took the opportunity, became a founding father, and it was really, really an awesome opportunity and an experience.
I love that. And we'll get back to the fraternity experience here in a moment. There's a lot I want to dig into with that, but we're getting ready to celebrate Veterans Day in the United States. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit of your experience with the military. I know it's a wide-ranging question because your experience spans so many years, but let's start at the beginning and let's work our way to today.
Yeah. Well, the interesting part about that is that I tell people that were it not for my experience in Sigma Pi, I would not have ever gotten into the Air Force. And I don't mean that metaphorically, and it's not an exaggeration in any form whatsoever. Because if you picture this, I graduated in 1993, and then the following spring, I was in boot camp. And there I was. The Air Force had suddenly discovered during a flight physical that I had some sort of medical disqualification.
Oh boy.
I was perfectly healthy and stupid young man, so I didn't understand why that should make any difference. I threw up the bullshit flag, Joe, and I said, no, I want to stay here. And can I tell you that for weeks on end, I fought my way in the middle of the discharge process. I wrote letters to my congressman. I wrote letters to my senators. I did everything. I went in front of a medical evaluation board, and everywhere I got, nope, thank you. Here's the off-ramp. You need to go home. You can't be in the Air Force. In almost desperation, I called the headquarters back in Vincennes in those days. Back in the 20th century when they were in Vincennes. And I said, do we know anybody who is a big shot in the military? Sure enough, they sent me the contact information for a couple generals. I sent sad sack, teary-eyed letters about how dedicated I was and how badly I wanted to serve to each of these guys. I don't know exactly which of them did it, but within a week I was back in training. Wow. So when I say that I owe my entire military experience to Sigma Pi, I'm not kidding.
It's incredible. So you get back in training, maybe walk us through completing that and then how you begin a lifelong career with the military.
Yeah, that was 1994, and coming up this February, I will celebrate my 32nd year in the Air Force. I was active duty for 9 years, and that took me all over the country. Didn't get to travel internationally during that time. But when I left active duty in 2003, I went into the corporate world and then joined the reserves, and that's where I've been ever since. And that's really where all the wild stuff that I've done in my military career has come from. That was teaching at the Air Force Academy, and going on deployments and working at the Pentagon, and all the stuff that you think the military is actually kind of all about. And mixed in with that, work in the private sector, working for tech companies, working as an executive for HP, obviously running my own consulting company, and then obviously the very fulfilling part about volunteering as an alumni advisor, as chapter director, both at UT Austin in Texas when I was working down there, and then when I moved back to Colorado eventually at CU Boulder.
Awesome. We will talk a bit about that volunteer experience. It's something that's near and dear to me because it's for me, just like you, I think it's the best part of the fraternity. But maybe we can hop over to that corporate experience a little bit. 9 years of active duty, and then you transition into the corporate world. What is that like? What's it like going from the military over to corporate America?
Do you know, it's funny. I was just sharing this experience with a colleague the other day. Undergrads listening to this, you're going to start your career. Maybe you'll go to grad school, maybe get an MBA or something like that, and then start. But still, you'll be, 24, 25, 26 years old, and you'll have your first baptism in fire job in corporate America. Now, picture that you are in your late 20s, early 30s. You are established. You have done stuff. You have been around the block. And then all of a sudden is your first experience in corporate America. And I knew none of it. I was so far behind the curve. Now, fortunately, being in the military, you learn to adapt. You learn to simply make things happen and barrel through, if nothing else. And so obviously I was able to adapt well, but it was a complete change of experience for me working in the civilian world after that. And I had colleagues and friends who were 9 years younger than I was, and 9 years farther along in. Meanwhile, my contemporaries were 9 years farther along in their corporate careers. I'd tell you, just for instance, the first time I ever got laid off, which, by the way, is not as bad as it sounds. I just want the young guys listening right now. It's going to happen to you, and it's actually pretty nice, because if you're not terribly enamored with your job, they give you money to go away, Joe. Did you know about this? But that was one of the experience that for me was startling. And it was part of a corporate riff. There were a lot of people that were let go at that time, and so I had contemporaries and colleagues who are also laid off, and they said, "What are you so upset about, Z?" They said, "This is what you do." I worked for one place that they said don't go anywhere, like don't move back to Denver, because next quarter is going to be different, and they're just going to hire everybody back anyway. And the joke was that this is the best first and third job you'll ever have. And so it was those little nuances and office politics and that sort of thing that were really revealing to me after having spent all that time in the military, and then all of a sudden, wait, you mean this is how it works? I remember having a mentor in my first corporate gig who was a consultant. And she became a mentor of mine. And in fact, she would eventually become my boss. She was recruited to another company and then hired me onto the team that she was building. And I look back, it's kind of quaint, because when I met her, she was a consultant for the company where I was working, and she had the greatest stories. And I just felt like a little schoolboy. I was like, really? You mean you do stuff here and then you go to another company and you do stuff there? And she's jet setting around the world, and it was just such a romantic picture. And she said, yeah, you should totally go into consulting which she didn't say when you get laid off here, but she said when you're ready for a change. And that was really that was an awesome opportunity that I definitely took as soon as I had the opportunity to get laid off. Yeah.
So
I didn't know, Joe, that this was going to be turned into that conversation. Tell us about another time you got shit canned there, Z.
start racking these up.
Yep.
You mentioned a little while ago that you learned flexibility from the military, and that helped prepare you for the transition to the professional world. What
Mhm.
else? What else did you learn over in the Air Force that prepared you for success over in corporate America?
Well, it, there's a lot of talk about leadership in the military, and obviously when you're in the officer corps and then teaching at the Air Force Academy, that is an incredible focus of what we do. And there are so many different styles of leadership. And one of the things that you'll experience if you're willing to, and this is another thing too, you have to be open to it and you have to be curious about it. So a lot of people will just do their jobs, both in the military and in corporate world. But if you're interested in self-development and if you're interested in improving whatever it is that you might be doing at any particular instance, uh, being curious about what sort of leader you are and also being open to the fact that you are simultaneously maturing and changing yourself so that you may take up different habits, you may take up different styles, you may try a leadership suit on and realize this doesn't feel right to you, and that's awesome and that's cool, right? It doesn't necessarily make you a better or worse leader. You have to understand that some people aren't meant to be just dig into the details, dig into the weeds, know all the numbers type of a leader. Some people aren't meant to be touchy-feely, happy leaders that are incredibly empathetic. You'll read books, and I'm sure that you have, and the guys listening are exposed to this all the time about these are the 8 qualities of a good leader, and you have to have all of these things. I just don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think you have to wear the leadership that is right for you, and you don't know that until you start doing it. And then even when you figured out what you think it is, you are going, as I said, you're going to change. And as you evolve, you're going to find different things that feel even better for you and feel even more right. And the only way to do that is, excuse me, is to try them out. And that kind of echoes with a more broad piece of advice that I always give to anybody from a career perspective and from a business perspective is that whenever you're given an opportunity to try something, just say yes. Nobody's going to come up to you, and this is the metaphor I always use. Nobody's going to come up to you with a scalpel and say, "All right, well, let's take Tugboat's kidney out. This will be a piece of cake, right?" And in a more terrestrial version of that is that, especially from a corporate perspective, nobody's business is doing so well that they can afford to set you up to fail simply, to get a chuckle out of your screwing something up, right? If somebody has said, "Hey, I want you to do this. This is a stretch for you, but I think you should give it a shot." That's a tremendous amount of faith that they're putting in you. And they wouldn't do that simply to say, "Watch what happens to Joe. This is going to be so funny. He's going to fall right on his face." No, they think you can do it. And you've got to have that sense of confidence and curiosity and guts to go after it.
Yeah, I always try to explain that to my students that when you are early in your career and someone in the hierarchy of your company, whether it's a small business or a big global conglomerate, whether they say, "Hey, why don't you give the presentation at the event next week?" Always say yes.
Yes.
Always say yes.
My career, both in the military as well as corporate, as well as consulting, as well as academics, which I've entered into in the last decade, my entire career is a never-ending, it seems, cascade of falling ass backwards into another really awesome thing that somebody had come up to me and said, "Hey, you want to give this a shot?" And believe me, we could spend the whole day, Joe, talking about examples of that and probably in your career as well.
Yeah.
Just saying yes.
Yeah. So for the younger guys out there listening, when someone in your office, someone in your company says, "Hey, do you want to give this a shot?" Yes, you do. Give it a shot. Give it a shot. Now we're gonna get to your volunteering experience here in a minute, but you just mentioned, for the last decade or so, you've been in education with training. Love to hear about how you got into that and your experiences with it.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'll use that as an example to share one of these falling into something. I had recently moved back to Colorado as another fantastic layoff opportunity, and the fellows in my reserve unit in Colorado Springs, if you're familiar with the geography, is where the Air Force Academy is located. One of them came up to me and said, "Hey, so how's that consulting going?" I'm like, well, not really all that great, but he said, "Well, tell you what, if you are interested in it, you can work full time as a reservist, even though reservists are always part time type of a thing. But there's a system where they can bring you on active service for an extended period of time, for a year or 2 years at a time, et cetera. And they have a program like that up at the Air Force Academy, and they're looking for professors." I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Yeah, you interested?" I said, "Well, it wasn't something I had thought about doing today, but yeah, sure." And so I did. And the next thing you know, there I was. I'm a professor. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm a professor, and I'm teaching statistics and I'm teaching calculus. And obviously, those are topics that I knew, but I didn't know how to teach them when I first started.
Yeah.
So they set me up with a more seasoned instructor who actually, and by the way, this was great. I outranked her, but she was in charge of the course that I was teaching, and so that was important. Well, I may outrank you, but you know how to do this because she'd been teaching for quite some time. And I just went in and watched her and then did what she did the next day when it was time for me to teach the class. And it felt so natural, and it was so I would say it was easy. I almost said it was easy, Joe, because it's not. You're an educator. It's not easy. Yeah, but it just felt so great. And one of the things that later on in a following or in a later civilian job that I had was working L&D, internal corporate training for a company that I was working for, and it felt perfectly natural because I'd been doing it for so long at the academy. And what I realized that, and this won't necessarily relate to everybody. I think you definitely appreciate this, Joe, as an educator yourself. But I think that there's something to take away from everybody listening, as well. And that is, what I realized is that although obviously I knew the topics of the courses I was teaching, what I realized is my talent was in teaching. It was in coming up with metaphors and coming up with different ways of explaining things and taking a step back and trying to see it from the student's perspective, and readdressing it and reattacking it if it didn't make perfect sense, and then trying to associate an experience that the learner had already had with something that I was trying to get across. And that's a talent in and of itself, right? Obviously, I had the talent in the technical aspects of what I was teaching, but I think what's valuable and something that is universal is finding and understanding what it is about what you do that you're good at and where you have that talent. And I think that the guys listening to this who are trying to think about, what do I want to do? What sort of career do I want to have? And where do I want to take my degree? Don't think just about, well, I do programming, right? Or I do management, or I'm in physics even, or pick what it is. What is it about that you have an affinity for, and you have an aptitude that led you to whatever your career is? Isolate that and find out what that is and focus on improving that, and you have no idea where it's going to lead.
That's the truth. That's the truth. I was talking to one of my students about this just the other day. As a guy who was an English major and then spent 20 plus years working in real estate and finance, and now teaches business. You never know which way the path is going to go. But as long as you keep your eyes open and keep your feet on the road, you probably wind up somewhere that's good for you. And I agree with you, man. Education's great. It's like the it is all the best things about the different jobs I've had before rolled into one, and I love it. Um, let me ask you about Sigma Pi and about volunteering. So, what is it about Sigma Pi that drew you to be a volunteer? So, for our listeners, when I started my volunteer career here 20 plus years ago, Nick was one of the first guys that I met out there, and I had a chance to learn from you and work with you. So maybe you could spend a couple of minutes telling our listeners how you approach volunteering for Sigma Pi, and maybe some of the lessons that you brought to volunteering from your experiences.
Well, yeah, and I'll take it back to the story that I told earlier. That 9 years that I was active duty in the Air Force was a dry Sigma Pi time for me, because much as I had hoped to, I was never stationed anywhere near a chapter or a colony. I would run into Sigma Pi every once in a while as I wear my letters, and you're a grown man. I'm still wearing my letters, right? And so I would run into a couple, especially in the military, every once in a while. But it wasn't until I joined, or it wasn't until I was in the reserves and was working in Austin, Texas, that I finally found that there was a chapter nearby, and I called up Nationals again. And I said, "Hey, I happen to be around. And I probably didn't. You know what, Joe? I probably didn't even know the term chapter director,
Yeah.
but right.
Yeah.
But I said, well, whoever's volunteering down there, if he needs any help, I'm happy. I'm in the neighborhood. I'm happy to come by for tailgaters or whatever you guys do down there." And they said, "Actually, thanks for asking." And then the next
Since you bring
thing
it
you know,
up.
I get roped in, and I'm the chapter director. And that this was the interesting thing about that is that I was at the chapter at UT Austin at the time, and I think still these days it is. And by the way, that was where I met Brad Poronsky. He was the sage there at one point while I was chapter director. They were this small, like, two dozen at times size men chapter, and UT Austin, as you can imagine, had a huge Greek community. And see, these guys were, I wouldn't call them the rump. I mean, they were proud and few sort of a thing, and really outstanding group of guys. And they just happen to be a small, small in size. So that was my first experience. And you talk about, meeting and learning and so forth. There was a guy named John Frost who was an advisor who would travel to the different chapters. And I met him and learned a lot from him. And then I was introduced to this whole national thing, and I started going to convocation and meeting other alumni volunteers who would help me out with, here's what I do at my chapter. My guys are this, my guys are that. And it was a great experience. And then when I moved back to Colorado, they were sorry to see me go. But then when Nationals got word of it, they said, "Oh, wait a second. CU Boulder just lost their chapter director." And this is a guy I knew. He had actually taken them to the Sages Cup, I think the year before I got there. And work had taken him away. And he was a hell of a guy. And they were a hell of a chapter as well. But that was such a different experience because CU Boulder, pretty big, maybe it was probably not as big as UT Austin as far as the Greek community goes. But these guys were the swing and dicks of that campus. I mean, and in fact, that's what the Greek advisor, that's the term he used. He said, "Your guys are like the cream of the crop around here. They run this campus." And so I was actually a little intimidated, Joe. I was like, "Oh, I'm kind of new at this myself." And I just kind of like gave thoughts down at UT.
Yeah.
And I was like, these guys aren't going to need me. And in reality, that was really the lesson learned, is that and this goes back again to something we talked about, your leadership style has to adjust. And you're not going to work with one team the same way you're going to work with another team. And if you ground it in certain things, and people will throw around the term servant leader and so forth, but this works in every instance, at least for me. Again, pick your own. But whether I'm a chapter director, or whether I'm leading a corporate team, or whether I'm leading a military organization, you're there to get rid of problems. You're there to grease skids and empower and enable the people who are working on the team. Now, the slightly different aspect is when I was an executive, I was responsible for, the mission and the vision. I was responsible for, this is where we're going, everybody. And I dictated, if you will say, where the end point was. The way that leadership style is interpreted there is, okay, here's where we're all going. What do you need to get there, right? When I was the chapter director, that's not my chapter. And not just because that's not my chapter because I went to Colorado State. That's not my chapter because these guys are building their own thing and they're running their own show, and they deserve the experience to define what their chapter is going to be like, and to draw terms and to relate with their campus community and with their local community the way that makes sense for that chapter. You can't come in as a chapter director and say, "Oh, okay, well, here's where we're going to do all this stuff." right? So in that sense, it's still the same thing. Okay, what do you guys need? You need me to talk to an administrator. You need help with the Greek, with a Greek advisor. You need me to bring in other alumni. What is it that I can do to make that work for you? But the spirit is still the same. It's just that one little bit of the role is different, where I don't get to dictate, what it is that we're doing. But at the end of the day, my day-to-day work basically has the same structure, which is, okay, what do you all need?
Yeah. Great advice for any young volunteer out there listening too. Go in there and ask your guys. If you don't know what to do, ask them. What do you need help with?
Well,
They'll tell you.
yeah, they'll tell you what they need. That's for sure, Joe. Yeah.
No question about it. So let's reverse the topic a little bit. What lessons do you think any of our young men out there in the fraternity can bring with them to a potential future career in the military?
Oh, in the military. Well, yeah. There's trust and brotherhood, and it's very tough for some people to appreciate the value of relying on others. We always want to rush great leaders and recruit great leaders and put great leaders on your executive council and send them off to convocation and make sure they get to SPU and midyear and all these things so they become great leaders and so forth. Being part of a team is a little trickier, right? And being humble enough to say, I have no idea how to do this part. I can do this and this and this. Let's go find somebody and put together a team and pull together a team that can accomplish these other things that I have absolutely no background and no experience in. It doesn't mean that I won't learn in the process, right? But no, it's not about humility even so much and knowing your limits, but it's knowing this is where we're trying to go. These are the things I know I can do. All right, how do I fill in those gaps and lean on my team members to get us across that finish line, and feeling okay and comfortable with the knowledge that I'm not going to be able to do all of the things.
That's great. That's great. I want to hop subjects for a moment. Sigma Pi Fraternity has a new slogan. It's Find Your Purpose. Can you talk about how Sigma Pi helped you find your purpose during your undergraduate years? And then maybe you can talk a little bit about how Sigma Pi has helped you find your purpose during your alumni years too.
Yeah, I saw this recently, and I saw in full disclosure, Tugboat had sent me, "Hey, here's what we're going to talk about." And I thought,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, that's a good one." Uh, so I think that I'm gonna make myself vulnerable here, Joe. When I was an undergrad, my purpose, I graduated in 3 years, and that was because I barreled my ass through it. I put my head down. This is what I want to do. I want to get out there into the real world and start making stuff happen. And my purpose at the time was that of a young man in a hurry. I wanted to do shit. I wanted to get things done. I wanted to get things accomplished. And I'll tell you what I did. I was a founding father and I joined the military, and then they said you can't, and then I made it after all anyway. And every bit, especially of my early career, to include corporate world, is a reflection of that. And as you look back as a gentleman in his 50s, which I am now, you start to reflect on some things that you missed, probably. I don't regret it, and I am living a very good life, having done a lot to put myself in the position I am. But at the same time, I think my purpose has changed a bit over the years. And now I'm at a place where, you know what? You go around once. And I think about the friends and the brothers that I've met along the way. I was just, we're recording this a week before Veterans Day, and just last week I was at a Halloween party with chapter brothers. And that follows a Rockies game, which sounds miserable, but let me finish. A Rockies game this summer with brothers. And this is really one of the first times that I have had a chance to settle down and enjoy the relationships that I can, quite frankly, almost rebuild with my brothers, because I haven't been as good at keeping in touch. And the reflection that I have on that is to see them interacting with each other, because for the past 30 years, they've been hanging out, watching each other's kids grow up and getting divorced and getting remarried and moving away, but staying in touch, and then moving back to Colorado and these sorts of things. And I got to be honest, I let a lot of that go by because, like I said, I was a young man in a hurry. And what's been interesting for me is, now that I'm getting more connected with my chapter brothers, I'm thinking about even the relationships that I had when I was a bit more involved in volunteering and so forth, and the positions that I held with the Grand Council on their committees. That is, I wasn't on the Grand Council, but on Grand Council committees and with the foundation. I just think, wow, I think there's even an aspect of that interaction that I had and those things that I did that were a little more, okay, let's do this, rather than, I love you guys, and this is just awesome. And don't get me wrong, you've been there, plenty of convocations late into the night, just hanging out and drinking with each other and telling stories. But there's a lot to brotherhood that you miss if you think that this is just business and we got to get these things done. And taking a minute and stepping back and just enjoying the presence and the brotherhood is it's easier to miss than you think.
It's one of the best perspectives that I've heard, Nick, on the new slogan, and how it helps you step back and think about, what is this brotherhood? What was it? How has it changed? How does it stay the same? What is it today? And I've had a similar bit of reflection when I think about find your purpose. I can tell you what my purpose is today. When I think about 20 some odd years ago when I was an undergraduate, I'm sure that guy back then could give you the purpose real quick. I want to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But today, what I think what that guy's purpose was, it's different. Was it just changing things? Was it stabilizing things? Was it just getting from point A to point B? Was it getting through a day, getting through a week, a month, a year? Yeah, it's a really good perspective you bring up. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us too, by the way, for Owl Talk. Before we go, because we're at the end here, brother. Do you have any parting words, any ideas, some thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
I would just go back to what we discussed earlier, and that is that your life is the culmination of the experiences that you've had. Each one of us has that same dynamic. And you can do all the planning you want, and you can think that you know where it's going to end up, but pausing from time to time and reflecting on what that is and how you got to where you are gives you an opportunity to turn back the other way and look forward and really embrace the concept of saying yes, right? Give it a shot. Before we started recording, we were talking about how snow's not so much flying here in Colorado, but there's some on the ground. And one of the things that I tell to my cadets at the academy and at the universities where I teach as well is, a lot of stuff, and sometimes you just have to point your tips downhill and go for it. And it's not about being reckless or careless, but it is about giving it a shot. And
Awesome.
you regret the shots you don't take.
Amen. Thanks, Nick. Hey, if our listeners want to find you and connect you with you on social media, where should they go?
I am on that bottomless pit of uselessness, LinkedIn. I'm sorry. I mean, make sure as you embark in your career that you have a presence on LinkedIn. I have a website, zeislerconsulting.com, which is spelled like it sounds, except not at all. But you can link there from my LinkedIn profile, through which I'm connected with damn near every Sigma Pi my age or older.
Cool. Thanks, Nick.
Yep.
You can stay up to date on the latest in the world of Sigma Pi fraternity by following us across social media. We are at Sigma Pi, all one word, on Instagram, X, LinkedIn, and Facebook. On YouTube, we are at Sigma Pi Fraternity, also one word. Remember, you can always get the latest information on Sigma Pi Fraternity at sigmapi.org. Thank you to everyone who listened to this episode, and we look forward to you joining us for the next Owl Talk podcast.